I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
So, as some of you know, I've been doing sessions on my book, The Gap in God's Country, A Longer View on Our Culture Wars. And one of the inspirations behind that book is the political psychology of Carl Jung. He's one of the theorists that I draw from. And actually, I'm still doing sessions I'm going to do two more. One is December 30th, and one is January 5th. December 30th, right around the corner on Monday, is all about religious strong-arming, where I look at the dynamics of cult formation, why it is that people join cults, why it is that people get sort of bowled over psychologically by authority figures, sometimes narcissistic authority figures, or just by systems, and whether or not this cult phenomenon can be applied at a larger level, let's say like at the level of a regular church, for instance, maybe a mega church. I'll be drawing from examples from my book. And then the last session on January 5th is going to be on my concluding recommendations. You can get recordings to all 5 of those sessions by signing up for any one session on Eventbrite, and I will put the information about how to do that in the show notes. But also, and kind of going along with that, like I said, Carl Jung has been an inspiration for my research for a while now. My previous book was on ideological possession, and that is a concept from Carl Jung. And in the new year, I wanted to change up the way I do things. We meet once a month on Zoom. That is, my reading group does. It's going to be more of a concentrated reading group now. It was kind of topical before, but what I'd like to do is change it up to a reading group in which we all kind of examine a book or a section of a book at more length for usually 3 sessions. So one session a month on the first Thursday. And of course, all of these are recorded if a person can't make it. The first book I wanted to cover is Carl Jung's The Undiscovered Self. This is excellent. This is part of, I want to say, volume 10 of the collected works of Jung, but it's a freestanding long essay, or in this case, they've made it into a short book. And just to give you an idea of what goes on in this book, I'm just going to first read the chapters. Chapter 1, The Plight of the Individual in Modern Society. 2, Religion as the Counterbalance to Mass-Mindedness. 3, The Position of the West on the Question of Religion. 4, The Individual's Understanding of Himself. 5, The Philosophical and Psychological Approach to Life. 6, Self-Knowledge. And 7, The Meaning of Self-Knowledge. Now, this book was first published, with a copyright here says 1957. That sounds about right. It was first published in the 50s in the wake of the emergence of the Cold War. And so it's Cold War tinged, but that is just sort of what was happening at the time. Much of this is still very applicable. And I think what I want to do is maybe we could discuss the first and second chapter in the first one coming up on, when is it? My goodness, it's on January 2nd, so next Thursday. So get this book if you want to read along. You don't absolutely have to. Every session I'll do a little bit of an intro, but it won't be a 45 to 50 minute intro. It'll be more like a 15 to 20 minute sort of intro about where we're going, maybe some leading questions and things like that. And then we're going to have a conversation. So if you can't read the book, still come. There'll be enough there that you can be a part of that conversation. But I mean, it's pretty short. What is it? It's about 123, 124 pages. And then, yeah, the second session, maybe we'll do chapters 3 through 5, and then the third session, chapters 6 and 7. So general plan there. I always feel free to like deviate from the plan if it looks like I should. What I wanted to do next is just read a few pages from the very first part of this book. For those of you who don't really know Jung very well, but you want to, or you just want to know a little bit more about this particular book. He says, "What will the future bring? From time immemorial, this question has occupied men's minds, though not always to the same degree. Historically, it is chiefly in times of physical, political, economic, and spiritual distress that men's eyes turn with anxious hope to the future, and when anticipations, utopias, and apocalyptic visions multiply. One thinks, for instance, of the chiliastic expectations of the Augustan age at the beginning of the Christian era, or of the changes in the spirit of the West which accompanied the end of the first millennium. Today, as the end of the second millennium draws near, we are again living in an age filled with apocalyptic images of universal destruction. What is the significance of that split symbolized by the Iron Curtain, which divides humanity into two halves? What will become of our civilization and of man himself if the hydrogen bombs begin to go off? Or if the spiritual and moral darkness of state absolutism should spread over Europe? We have no reason to take this threat lightly. Everywhere in the West, there are subversive minorities who, sheltered by our humanitarianism and our sense of justice, hold the incendiary torches ready, with nothing to stop the spread of their ideas except the critical reason of a single, fairly intelligent, mentally stable stratum of the population. One should not, however, overestimate the thickness of this stratum. It varies from country to country in accordance with the national temperament. Also, it is regionally dependent on public education and is subject to the influence of acutely disturbing factors of a political and economic nature. Taking plebiscites as a criterion, one could, on an optimistic estimate, put its upper limit at about 40% of the electorate. A rather more pessimistic view would not be unjustified either, since the gift of reason and critical reflection is not one of man's outstanding peculiarities, and even where it exists, it proves to be wavering and inconstant, the more so, as a rule, the bigger the political groups are. The mass crushes out the insight and reflection that are still possible with the individual, and this necessarily leads to doctrinaire and authoritarian tyranny if ever the constitutional state should succumb to a fit of weakness. Rational argument can be conducted with some prospect of success only so long as the emotionality of a given situation does not exceed a certain critical degree. If the affective temperature rises above this level, the possibility of reasons having any effect ceases, and its place is taken by slogans and chimerical wish fantasies. That is to say, a sort of collective possession results with rapidly developing into a psychic epidemic. In this state, all those elements whose existence is merely tolerated as asocial under the rule of reason come to the top. Such individuals are by no means rare curiosities to be met with only in prisons and lunatic asylums. For every manifest case of insanity, there are, in my estimation, at least 10 latent cases who seldom get to the point of breaking out openly, but whose views and behavior, for all their appearance of normality, are influenced by unconsciously morbid and perverse factors. There are, of course, no medical statistics on the frequency of latent psychoses, for understandable reasons. But even if their numbers should amount to less than 10 times that of the manifest psychoses and of manifest criminality, the relatively small percentage of the population figures they represent is more than compensated for by the peculiar dangerousness of these people. Their mental state is that of a collectively excited group ruled by affective judgments and wish fantasies. In a state of collective possession, they are the adapted ones, and consequently, they feel quite at home in it. They know from their own experience the language of these conditions, and they know how to handle them. Their chimerical ideas, upborne by fanatical resentment, appeal to the collective irrationality and find fruitful soil there, for they express all those motives and resentments which lurk in more normal people under the cloak of reason and insight. They are, therefore, despite their small number in comparison with the population as a whole, dangerous as sources of infection precisely because the so-called normal person possesses only a limited degree of self-knowledge. Most people confuse self-knowledge with knowledge of their conscious ego personalities. Anyone who has ego consciousness at all takes it for granted that he knows himself. But the ego knows only its own contents, not the unconscious and its contents. People measure their self-knowledge by what the average person in their social environment knows of himself, but not by the real psychic facts, which are for the most part hidden from them. In this respect, the psyche behaves like the body, with its physiological and anatomical structure, of which the average person knows very little too. Although he lives in it and with it, most of it is totally unknown to the layman. And special scientific knowledge is needed to acquaint consciousness with what is known of the body, not to speak of all that is not known, which also exists. What is commonly called self-knowledge is therefore a very limited knowledge, most of it dependent on social factors of what goes on in the human psyche. Hence, one is always coming up against the prejudice that such and such a thing does not happen with us or in our family or among our friends and acquaintances. And on the other hand, one meets with equally illusory assumptions about the alleged presence of qualities which merely serve to cover up the true facts of the case. So that gives you some idea of where this book is headed. The ultimate cure to ideological possession or collective possession, as he puts it here, is self-knowledge. And apparently that is not the same thing as ego knowledge, knowing the superficial self. So among the things we get at in this book is, what is the self archetype? And does it make sense? I mean, that's what we're going to be talking about. So again, the only way to get in on these sessions is to join our Patreon, the Maurin Academy Patreon, at either the Worker, Scholar, or Salt of the Earth level. That is $5 a month or $10 a month. For $5 a month, you get everything we do recorded, and you get my monthly sessions live and recorded, as well as Jacob's reading group, which I'm not going to talk too much about that here because he's also making some changes to his reading group. So when he gets that solidified, I'll probably have a conversation with him for you guys. But go to our Patreon, join it at either the Worker, Scholar, or the Salt of the Earth level. Salt of the Earth will get you into all of our courses and reading groups and speeches live, and you'll get the recordings. So, I mean, either level is a real deal, actually. I mean, over the course of the year, if you participate in some of these things, you get quite an education for a fairly small amount of money. We do need the support. We need to show that we're reaching people. We also just need the funds to be able to keep going. It costs some money to do the work that we do. And so we appreciate everybody who becomes a patron of the Maurin Academy. I'll be putting that information in the notes below. So just to recap, if you want to get in on my last two Gap and God country sessions, you can get on that by either joining our Patreon or by going to Eventbrite. If you want to join the reading group, and with our first book in the Great Books reading group being Carl Jung's The Undiscovered Self, become a patron. And I hope to see you there. I'm excited about this new direction. I've always wanted to do basically a Great Books reading group. Of course, I get to pick the great books. They may actually be books that have been written recently sometimes too, with, of course, input from patrons. But hopefully you guys are excited about this. I am. I think it will give us some insight on what's going on in our world right now, or I wouldn't be looking at it. All right. Hopefully I will see you in the new year or even before then on December 30th.